Welcome to another video in the series regarding effects for the 5th edition rule set in Fantasy Grounds. The purpose of this video is to talk about the timing of effects and how this can change the way things work during combats and also during the game itself. So let's get our player character, Hamish. We've got our power group set up as usual, and we'll just create a simple effect here to give Hamish advantage to his attack rolls. So far we've in previous videos we've ignored the duration, and we can see that there are two boxes here, the first being an editable box into which you would put a number, and the second you can cycle through by clicking on it. It starts off at rounds, and then you can have minutes, hours or days, and back to rounds. So let's say that we want to allow Hamish only 2 rounds with his advantage to attack, so we just click on that and we enter 2. We leave the expend box at never, and although this seems to be counterintuitive in that what we're saying is the expending or this effect will never expend, this duration here takes priority over this box here. So the duration here in this case will be 2 rounds, even though we've got the expend set to never. We'll set our targeting to self, and then we need to get Hamish onto the combat tracker. Let's give him an initiative of 10, so he's first, and let's make it his turn to go. We can now apply the effect, and as you can see, Fantasy Grounds has added the duration into the effect in square brackets here, D2. So let's advance the combat tracker, and we see that it's still D2, and once it comes round to Hamish's turn again, Fantasy Grounds has decremented the duration to just 1 round. And if we keep going, when it gets to his next turn, the effect will be removed from Hamish because the duration of the effect has expired. If we now go in and change the duration here to one of 2 minutes instead of 2 rounds, close that and then reapply the effect, you'll see that Fantasy Grounds has converted the minutes into rounds. 1 round being 6 seconds, so therefore there are 10 rounds in a minute, 20 in 2 minutes. And so Fantasy Grounds will convert that, and it will continue to decrement the rounds as we go through them. Every time it comes out to Hamish's turn, it will continue to reduce the number of rounds or the duration of the effect by 1 turn. This won't, however, work if we made this hours. If we remove this effect and add this one, you'll see that Fantasy Grounds just simply has the effect there. It isn't converting the hours into rounds. So if you wanted to do something like this, if you wanted to decrement down an effect which lasts a long time, then you're going to have to convert the hours here to rounds. If we make this, let's supposing it's going to last for 1 hour instead of 2, then we would have to put in an amount of 600 rounds, which would be equal to the number of 1 hour. If we apply that effect now, we can see that it will continue to decrement, and it will go a long time. Now, of course, if the player character is unlikely to be in combat for an entire hour, but the Dungeon Master can adjust this number. So if 10 minutes has passed, for example, he can decide that 100 rounds have passed. He can just simply edit the number in there and reduce the number of rounds manually, just like that. So that's a reasonably straightforward example here, but let's supposing now that Hamish is a spellcaster or he's got some kind of ability which causes a disadvantage to an attack to an enemy, and that this effect will expire at the end rather than the beginning of Hamish's turn, I should say. So let's change this effect here to disadvantage to attack, and let's set the duration to 1 round, and we're going to make it targets. So we'll remove this, and Hamish is going to target Orc 1, and he's going to apply the effect to the Orc. If we look at the Orc's effects dialog here, if we open up this extra information, we can see that the effect has been applied by Hamish, and that the duration is 1 turn, and that the effect or the initiative to adjust on is 10. So this is the way Fantasy Grounds calculates or works out when an effect should expire. So what it's saying here is that the initiative that this effect will expire on will be initiative count 10, which is Hamish's initiative. So if we cycle through the combat tracker here, when it gets to Hamish's turn, that effect will disappear from the Orc. That's not what we wanted. We wanted the effect to disappear at the end rather than the beginning of Hamish's turn. So let's reapply the effect, and we can simulate the end of a turn by adjusting this number here, initiative to adjust on. Now, initiative counts down normally from highest to lowest, and this value here actually can have a decimal point on it, or it can be a whole number. So obviously after initiative 10 would become initiative 9. So we can adjust this figure here to initiative 9. Now that on the face of it looks like once Hamish's turn is over and we get to initiative 9, nothing is happening in initiative 9, the effect will remove. However, if we leave it as it is, as soon as Hamish's turn is taken, as soon as the combat tracker moves on to Orc 1, that effect is going to disappear, so we actually are worse off. So the way we get round that is to adjust the duration in this box to 2. And that way, when Hamish's turn finishes and it begins the Orc's turn, as you can see, the 2 changed to 1, but the initiative to adjust on has remained the same. And if we now cycle through, when it gets to Hamish's turn, the effect is still on the Orc because we haven't yet got to initiative 9. But when Hamish's turn ends and it moves on to the Orc, then the disadvantage to the attack effect has been removed from the Orc. So that's how you would get around the problem of Fantasy Grounds removing effects at the beginning of a turn when the effect that you want to expires at the end of the turn. Now, another consideration for the timing of when an effect should expire, or the countdown of an effect, you've got such things as Hunter's Mark and hex spells and things like that, which last for quite a long time and could have several different targets. Now, whenever an effect is applied to a target, then the duration basically resets itself to the duration that was given out in the effect in the first place. So we need to find a method of moving the effect onto a target without reducing the duration. So let's just create a simple damaging effect on Hamish. We're going to set it to self, and we're going to set it for 600 rounds, which would be equivalent to an hour. We know from the last video that in order to apply this effect, we're going to have to shift and drag it. And we do so, and the effect goes in and is going to last for 600 minutes or 600 rounds, and we've got Orc 1 as the target. So now when we do some damage to Orc 1, he takes an extra d6 of damage. If we move the combat tracker on back to Hamish's turn, we can see that the duration has decremented by a point, and we can now do some more damage to orc number 1, and again he rolls the d6. Now this time we've killed the orc, or rather the orc is unconscious, and if the Dungeon Master were to remove this orc now from the combat tracker, and then when it came back round to Hamish's turn, he decided that he was going to move his Hunter's Mark or his Hex spell onto another target, he would only be able to do that from here, and he would reset or automatically reset the counter. So what we can do to get round, or what the Dungeon Master can do to get round that, is to use the targeting reticule here, and he can drag this effect onto a new target. So you can see now that Hamish has got Orc 1 and 2 targeted, and it's applied by Hamish. And if the Dungeon Master now deletes Orc 1 because it's dead, that disappears from the targeting and only Orc 2 is left. And if Hamish does some damage to Orc 2, we can see that the effect has taken, and we've got an extra d6 damage. And if we move the combat tracker on, the effect has remained, the counter for the effect has remained. Now, of course, we don't want the player characters to be on the combat tracker for the entire turn or the entire adventure, so the Dungeon Master can manually alter this number. So if 10 minutes have passed since the last action and they're in combat again, he could simply alter that to 498 rounds, assuming that 10 minutes has passed by. So that's how you can retain the counters for effects using the targeting reticule. So that's essentially it for the duration of an effect. Let's now look at the expend. The default here is never, and as we said earlier on, this doesn't mean that the effect will stay on forever. If there is a duration in here, then this will take precedence. If, however, the duration here is blank, then the effect will persist forever. Now we've got several options here. If we click through them, we've got on next action, on next roll, once per modifier, and back to never. So let's look at the on next action. We're going to chain a couple of effects here. We're going to give Hamish a benefit to his attack roll. Let's say 3. So attack 3, and then we need a semicolon to separate the two effects, and then we'll leave the damage at 1d6. We're not really too concerned about the duration here, but we can put a duration in, and the same thing would apply, that if this bit doesn't happen, then the duration the effect will expire. So if this is set to a minute, for example, then the spell or whatever the effect will stay there for a minute, if this bit here doesn't expire at first. So let's just leave the duration for the moment, since it doesn't really matter. So we've set up our effect, and we've set it up on next action, and we can see that the effect line is saying that the effect is going to expire on the next action. So let's get rid of this effect and let's apply the new one. And what this means is that on the next relevant action that Hamish takes, this effect will expire. Now, a relevant action in this case will either be an attack or a damage roll. So if, for example, Hamish were to make a saving throw, it's not going to affect this effect in any way whatsoever. It's going to remain here until he makes an attack or a damage roll. So let's target Orc 2, and let's make an attack roll. And as you can see, as soon as he's made the attack roll, the effect disappeared. He got his +3 for the attack, but the whole effect has been removed. If we put the effect back on again, and if we make a damage roll against Orc 2 this time, you can see that equally the effect has been removed. So even in multiple effects such as this, the next relevant action, in this case an attack or a damage, will remove the effect from the player character. So that's on next action. So let's have a look at the on next roll. We just change that, everything else remains the same. Let's clear up this orc being unconscious, give him back his hit points. And we've still got orc 2 targeted, so we'll apply the effect to Hamish. And again, although this is saying it's on the next roll, it means the next relevant roll. So if we make a dex saving throw or a con check or something like that, that's not going to affect the effect in any way. It's going to have to be an attack or a damage roll. So if we still have orc 2 targeted, so if we make an attack roll now against orc 2, we'll see that the effect disappears. Now, on the face of it, this doesn't seem to make any difference or be any different from on next action. But if we reapply this effect and then we target all of the orcs, this time when we make the attack action, the +3 bonus is actually only going to apply to one of the orcs that we've targeted, because it is literally on the next roll. Each attack against the orc is a separate roll, so the first roll is going to get the +3, everything else is not. So let's make the attack, and as you can see here, the effect has expired, and orc 2 got the +3, but the attacks against orc 4 and orc 3 didn't. They just got the normal bonus that Hamish gets for his dagger attack. Now if we reapply the effect again, and this time we make a damage roll, we've still got orcs 4 and 2 targeted. If we make a damage roll, we'll see that all of the orcs got the additional d6 from the damage. This is because damage is only rolled once and applied to all the targets, whereas each target is individually calculated as per the Dungeons and Dragons rules. So that is effectively the difference between on next roll and on next action. So the last one that we want to look at is once per modifier. Now this literally means that the person on this effect is sitting. The effect is going to last until all the potential actions in the effect string have been done. So if we apply the effect, and let's just remove all the targeting here, and we'll target orc 1 or orc 2. So we've got an attack and we've got the damage here. Now again, if we make a saving throw or whatever, that's not going to affect anything. It's going to have to be a relevant action. So we can make an attack or a damage, and literally if we make an attack, the attack portion of this effect is going to disappear. If we make a damage, the damage portion is going to disappear. But it'll only happen once. So if we attack orc 2, we can see that orc 2 got his +3, the +3 bonus was given to orc 2, and the attack part of the effect disappeared. We're only left with the damage part. So if Hamish was to make another attack, let's say, well, against the same orc even, we see that he doesn't get the +3 bonus because the attack 3 is no longer part of the effect, and he continue making attacks if he wants to, as many as he likes against anything at all, and he's not going to get any more bonus because the attack part has disappeared. But as soon as he does a damage roll of any kind, then the damage part of the effect also disappears. So once per modifier essentially means that the Fantasy Grounds will look at any attack, roll, damage, save, whatever, and if there is an effect chained together like that, it will drop that effect as soon as a relevant roll is made, but it will leave the other parts of the effect intact until a relevant roll of that type is made. Right, I think that's about it for this video. There may be one more in the series, or this could be the end. I think there's probably a few things to discuss for one more video, and if so, we shall see you there. Bye for now, and thanks for watching.